Steelers Nation! Before we get started, I want to wish each and every one of you a fantastic Monday. May your week begin with good health, positive energy, success, and plenty of great news. So, without any further delay, let's get into today's Steelers news. Here we go, Steelers. Here we go. The biggest storyline heading into Steelers training camp might not be a blockbuster trade or a surprise signing. Instead, it could be the development of one player who isn't even expected to see the field this season. During a recent Steelers mailbag discussion, one of the first questions centered on a fascinating possibility. What if Drew Allar somehow earns the QB2 job before the regular season begins? It's a scenario that immediately raises bigger questions about the entire quarterback room and what it would actually mean for the franchise moving forward. The discussion wasn't framed as a prediction. Quite the opposite. The expectation remains that Drew Allar will experience the normal growing pains every rookie quarterback faces. There is no assumption that he will suddenly leap over veterans on the depth chart. In fact, the belief is that he probably won't take a meaningful snap during the regular season unless multiple injuries force him into action. That makes this training camp especially important because every practice rep, every preseason drive, and every sign of improvement becomes part of a much bigger evaluation of Pittsburgh's future at quarterback. But imagine for a moment that Allar does surprise everyone. If he consistently outplays the competition throughout camp and the preseason, the conversation changes completely. It wouldn't simply be an indictment of the quarterbacks around him. Instead, it would become one of the earliest signs that Mike McCarthy and his coaching staff are already making a significant impact on the development of the team's young signal caller. That would be one of the most encouraging developments the Steelers could ask for because the organization isn't looking for immediate production from Allar. They're looking for long-term growth, patience, and steady progress. That naturally leads into one of the biggest reasons why this year's training camp feels so intriguing. There are multiple quarterback storylines unfolding at the same time. Drew Allar is trying to prove that he belongs in the future plans. Will Heyward is finally getting another opportunity after his previous preseason ended before it ever really began because of a hand injury. Now healthy, Heyward has another chance to show whether he can take another step in his own development after flashing some encouraging signs with the third team before getting hurt. Watching both young quarterbacks side by side could become one of the most fascinating battles of the summer. The quarterback competition isn't the only reason fans should be paying close attention once camp opens. There's also enormous curiosity surrounding Patrick Graham's defense. One of the most anticipated aspects of camp will be watching the chess match between Graham and Aaron Rodgers during practices. Defensive disguises, creative pressure packages, and completely new looks are expected to be part of the daily competition, giving everyone an early glimpse into how this defense may evolve throughout the season. Then there's Jeremy Bernard, another player generating genuine excitement before camp even begins. The expectation is that Bernard could quickly become a reliable target because of the traits he brings to the offense. Reliable hands, disciplined route running, and the ability to create yards after the catch all stand out as qualities that could earn the trust of Aaron Rodgers much faster than most rookie receivers. While veteran quarterbacks don't always develop immediate chemistry with first-year wide receivers, Bernard is viewed as someone capable of breaking that trend because of how polished his overall game already appears. Another major theme surrounding the Steelers entering camp is the balance between competing now and preparing for the future. There are several expensive veterans on the roster, and naturally some fans wonder whether keeping this core together makes sense beyond this season. The answer depends almost entirely on how the year unfolds. If the Steelers perform well and remain legitimate contenders, there's every reason to believe many of those veterans will stay together for another run. But if the season disappoints, the organization could eventually begin reshaping the roster by moving experienced players, creating salary cap flexibility, collecting draft capital, and allowing Mike McCarthy to continue building the team around his own long-term vision. That's exactly why this training camp carries so much weight. Every young player is fighting for more than just a roster spot. Every veteran is trying to prove that this current window remains open. Every coaching decision will be analyzed through the lens of both winning immediately and preparing for what comes next. The quarterback room, the defensive adjustments, and the emergence of young offensive weapons could ultimately shape not only this season, but the direction of the franchise over the next several years. So now the question goes directly to Steelers Nation. If you had to pick just one storyline to follow throughout training camp, would it be Drew Allar's development, Will Howard's opportunity, Patrick Graham's new defensive ideas, or Jeremy Bernard's push for a major offensive role? And why? The possibility of major roster decisions doesn't stop with the quarterback position. One of the most interesting questions raised during the discussion involved the future of veteran players and whether Pittsburgh could eventually begin making difficult financial decisions depending on how this season unfolds. The belief is simple. This year is going to provide many of those answers. If the Steelers continue winning and the veteran core performs at a high level, there's little reason to expect dramatic changes. But if expectations aren't met, the organization could begin a significant retooling by moving veteran players, creating salary cap space, accumulating additional draft picks, and continuing to reshape the roster around Mike McCarthy's long-term vision. That philosophy becomes even more interesting when discussing the defense, because one player has already emerged as an early candidate to become the team's most valuable contributor this season. Jalen Ramsey was identified as someone who could completely transform how Pittsburgh lines up defensively. Instead of simply playing traditional cornerback, the expectation is that he'll be asked to fill a versatile hybrid role, operating from the slot while contributing as a blitzer, a run defender, and a coverage defender depending on the situation. The comparison that was brought up is particularly fascinating because it looks back at the role Mike Hilton successfully played in Pittsburgh's defense several years ago. Hilton's versatility allowed the Steelers to disguise pressure, defend the run aggressively, and remain unpredictable before the snap. The expectation now is that Ramsey could provide an even bigger impact thanks to his size, instincts, and overall athletic profile. If Patrick Graham fully unlocks that versatility, the Steelers could have one of the most flexible defensive chess pieces anywhere in the league. Of course, another topic generating attention is the future of Alex Highsmith after Carolina lost edge rusher Nick Scorton to a season-ending injury. Naturally, that sparked speculation about whether the Panthers could become a potential trade partner for Pittsburgh. However, the current outlook doesn't suggest the Steelers are actively looking to move Highsmith. The discussion instead centered on a very specific scenario that would have to unfold before trade talks became realistic. That scenario would involve Highsmith reporting to training camp and refusing to practice without a new contract. If that were to happen, then conversations about possible compensation would become much more realistic, with the suggestion that a second-round pick could potentially enter the discussion. But without that kind of contract dispute, the expectation remains that Pittsburgh would much rather keep Highsmith for this season, maintain its dangerous three-man edge rotation, compete for a championship, and revisit his future after the year concludes. The wide receiver room also remains one of the most closely watched positions entering camp. Rather than immediately pursuing another veteran addition, the feeling is that the Steelers first need to evaluate what they already have. Jeremy Bernard and Roman Wilson will both have opportunities to prove they deserve meaningful roles before the front office considers making another move. The projected receiver rotation paints a very balanced picture. DK Metcalf is viewed as the primary deep threat capable of stretching defenses vertically while also creating yards after the catch. Michael Pittman Jr. brings physicality, dependable hands, red zone reliability, and strong run blocking. Jeremy Bernard projects as a versatile big slot receiver who can create opportunities after the catch and even line up in different areas of the formation. Roman Wilson offers speed from the slot and the ability to challenge defenses down the field. On paper, that combination gives Pittsburgh multiple skill sets without requiring every receiver to play the exact same role. Still, there is one important condition attached to that optimism. Those younger receivers must demonstrate they can earn Aaron Rodgers' trust. If they struggle to establish chemistry with the veteran quarterback during camp and the preseason, then conversations about adding another experienced receiver could become much more serious. That's where names like Stephon Diggs entered the discussion. Even so, there are clear obstacles. Financially, such a move could be difficult, and there are also questions about whether Diggs would even want to join a situation where he might not receive the target share or role he desires. Perhaps the most revealing part of the entire conversation came when reflecting on a previous roster decision. Looking back, the departure of George Pickens was described as one of the biggest missed opportunities for Pittsburgh's offense. The reasoning was straightforward. The Steelers spent last season searching for enough reliable receivers, and keeping Pickens alongside DK Metcalf could have dramatically changed the offense's ceiling. With both receivers on the field together, defenses would have faced far more difficult coverage decisions, potentially opening up the passing game and creating far more explosive opportunities for Aaron Rodgers. At the same time, it was acknowledged that the relationship between the organization and Pickens had deteriorated to the point where a trade became unavoidable from the Steelers' perspective. Even if fans can imagine what the offense might have looked like with that pairing, the reality presented in the discussion is that both sides had reached a point where moving on was viewed as the only realistic outcome. Looking beyond this season, another position that could eventually become a priority is linebacker. Questions remain about the long-term future of the group, while safety and quarterback were also identified as positions worth monitoring depending on how players perform throughout the year. In other words, this season won't just determine the Steelers' playoff chances, it may also shape the franchise's biggest priorities heading into next offseason. The uncertainty surrounding the linebacker position also deserves attention because it quietly has the potential to become one of the biggest storylines beyond this season. The discussion pointed out that Patrick Queen is entering the final year of his contract, while Peyton Wilson finds himself in what could be viewed as a defining season for his career. This year may determine whether he's capable of becoming a full-time starter, or whether he'll ultimately settle into more of a rotational role in sub-packages. Cole Holcomb remains under contract and provides stability, but the long-term picture at linebacker is far from settled. If this unit struggles throughout the season, don't be surprised if linebacker becomes one of Pittsburgh's highest priorities during the next offseason. Safety was another position identified as one worth monitoring closely. Jaquan Brisker is only on a one-year contract, meaning his performance this season could directly impact the organization's future plans. If he establishes himself as the long-term answer, that question is solved.